In today's video, I'm going to be talking about how I got my dream job as a visual effects artist. I've talked about it here and there in videos in the past, and also it's a question that comes up occasionally on the live streams that I do. A lot of the time when people are messaging me directly on Instagram to ask questions, it's usually centered around career advice. And also, especially on my recent videos, one of the questions that comes up time and time again is just, where did you learn to do all of this? So this is the answer. This will be mostly just me talking, but I'll try and put up some pictures and stuff to aid what I'm talking about to make it a bit more visually interesting as I go. So let's go all the way back. Essentially, I had quite a long run up to becoming a visual effects artist. Some of my earliest memories of working out what visual effects were come from watching YouTube videos. So channels like Film Riot, Freddie W, Corridor Digital. That was where I first kind of worked out what visual effects was. And at that time I was consuming visual effects just purely as someone that was interested in it, as a member of the audience. Throughout my time when I was in high school, and to clarify, in the UK, high school is when you're between the age of 10 to 15, it's not the same as high school in America, I started to get a little bit interested in filmmaking in general, and originally that just manifested in the form of me getting hold of my family's camcorder that we used to shoot videos on when we were on holiday and things, and making videos with my friends just for fun. I was quite academic in school, I got some good grades when I left, and so when it came to college I was faced with the decision of, do I want to put all of my eggs in one basket and start to go down the route of, okay, I want to be a filmmaker, or do I study sensible subjects and then kind of try and pursue the creative thing in the background and just hope it works out? And then when I went to the open day, when I was looking around at colleges, I discovered there was a course called Creative Media Production. And there was also a course for games design, which I was also really interested in. So I thought about it for a little while, I kind of weighed up my options, and I decided just to commit to it. I knew what I wanted to do at that point, so I didn't see much use in studying things that weren't related to the career that I wanted to go into. I was really fortunate that my teacher for all of my subjects at college was Grant Abbott. Grant, as you probably know, if you watch my channel, you'll probably be aware of who he is. Grant has, in my opinion, one of the best Blender channels on YouTube. When I first went to college, Grant's channel had about 2,000 subscribers, and he was just doing it kind of on the side as well as teaching, which was his main job. And so as you can probably imagine, having Grant as a teacher for the 2 years was really cool. I learned a lot of the stuff that I know in Blender from him. The games design course wasn't specifically geared towards visual effects, but I was able to spend 2 years learning how to use the 3D software. And all of the skills like modeling, texturing, animation, rigging, and everything that I learned are completely transferable to visual effects. So I was just taking the stuff that I was learning in my games design course and applying that to my YouTube videos and mucking about with Blender. And even though that games design course wasn't directly related to visual effects, learning Blender became one of the best things I think I've ever done for my career. So I finished college, I got 100% in all of my classes, and it was time to think about what am I going to do next. And this is essentially where the turning point happened and my career went in a very specific direction very quickly. As you're probably aware, after leaving college or school, the usual thing you would do is go to university and study for a degree. I was in a strange position where I felt like I knew enough about filmmaking that I wouldn't benefit that much, especially from the first year at university. The stuff that I'd learned at college combined with my experience that I'd had from making YouTube videos for a few years at that point, which meant I had a nice portfolio of visual effects stuff as well. It wasn't super high end. In fact, if I play some of it now, you can see it's actually the opposite of high end. It's pretty amateur. And so with all of that in mind, plus the fact that university in the UK is very expensive, it costs about £9,000 a year, I didn't want to be paying all that money and go to university and be almost back to square one, where, you know, the first term they're teaching you how to put up a tripod and how to edit and things. It was stuff I already knew how to do, so it didn't really seem like a good use of my time or my money. So I decided that I was going to give myself a year to find something else. Instead of going to university with my friends, I would take essentially a gap year, but instead of traveling, I would spend it trying to find work. It started out by just applying for any kind of job that I could find that was to do with filmmaking. I applied for internships as a production assistant at the BBC. I applied for a few jobs as a social media content creator. One of them was for an electric car company. I just wanted to do something that was to do with using a camera or editing. Visual effects was always my end goal, but I didn't really know how to get there at the time because I just left college with some very basic skills. I didn't really know how to get to the point where I could join a massive visual effects company and they would just hire me. And then at some point while Googling options on the internet, I think I typed in something like visual effects internships and apprenticeships in London. One of the top search results that came up was a 2D and 3D apprenticeship at visual effects companies in London. I don't remember the application process being particularly complicated. I think I sent a link to some of my YouTube videos or my showreel. So I submitted my application, but then I didn't hear anything for 6 months. So I just assumed, you know, that obviously hasn't worked out, on to the next one. And then just as the summer holidays began after I finished college, I got an email from the Next Gen company that were doing the visual effects apprenticeship to say, can you come up to London for an assessment day? So a couple of weeks later, I went up to London. The assessment day was at Double Negative. There were 14 of us that had been shortlisted out of about 500 that had originally applied. And essentially the idea was that there were 5 or 6 of the big visual effects companies there in London, and each of them were going to take on an apprentice. I think I'm forgetting a couple, but it was definitely Framestore, Double Negative, The Mill, One of Us, Molinaire. I think Jellyfish Pictures was there. So if you know anything about visual effects and the companies that work on visual effects, you'll know that those are some of the real heavy hitters of the industry, especially in London. I was quite a few years younger than everyone else there. I think most of the people were in their late 20s or early 30s, and at the time I was just 18. So in my head I was thinking it probably went okay, but I think I'm a little bit inexperienced compared to some of the other people that were there, and a little bit too young. Probably not this year, but maybe in a few years' time this will be something good to apply for again, and maybe I'll stand more of a chance. So imagine my surprise when at 10 AM the next morning I get a phone call from the mill to say we'd like to offer you the jobs as an apprentice. That was an amazing phone call to receive, I have to say. To be honest, at the time I didn't really know who the mill were, and upon reflection, probably should have done a bit more research on the companies involved beforehand, so I would have known that. Like most people getting into visual effects, my intention was basically I want to work on Avengers Endgame and Harry Potter and Star Wars and, you know, all the big titles. So to do that, you would want to go to a company like Double Negative or Framestore that do all the big kind of blockbuster films. The mill does originally have a big legacy of working on films. They even won an Oscar for the visual effects on Gladiator. But by the time I joined, they were working on commercials, and little did I know, the mill was basically the gold standard for visual effects in commercials. So I start my job at the mill. I'm a 2D apprentice, which means I'm working as a compositor in the 2D department, and I'm working as a nuke artist, which is a software that I have not touched before. One thing I wasn't aware of at the time, but have come to realise later as the years have gone by, was that going into a company like the mill that does commercials was actually a much better route than going into film in terms of career progression. At the bigger studios, basically you go in and you start on the bottom rung of the ladder. Usually that will be a runner if you're straight out of university, or in the case of the apprentices that I was with that went to those companies, you go into the roto and prep department, so you're doing roto and cleanup for the first couple of years or so that you're at the company. And from there you kind of work your way up, but it takes a long time to get into the compositing department at these big studios. And some of the guys that I was on the apprenticeship with are still in the roto and prep departments. They're leads of their fields now and they're very good at what they do. I'm not knocking it at all, they're very talented. But for me, compositing is what I wanted to do. So actually it was incredibly lucky and just by chance that I went to a company that doesn't really have those kind of scale of departments. All the people in the 2D department at the mill were compositors. It was still a very big company with loads of artists, but we would outsource all of that work to external companies, which meant that all the compositing was just done in the London base. What that means is, as well as skipping going to university and then doing the time as a runner, I also skipped those first few years where you're kind of in the trenches doing roto and cleanup. So if you think about it, I got maybe like an 8-year head start on everyone else in the industry. At the age of 18, I was doing what it usually takes people until they're in their late 20s to get to. And to be clear, that's not from my own ability, or maybe a very small amount, but mostly being in the right place at the right time and the opportunity being there for me to take hold of. In that time, I also watched a huge amount of tutorials, both while I was at work and also outside of work, so that I could make myself as useful as possible in the shortest amount of time possible. I really didn't want to feel like a burden on the other people that I was on the job with, and I wanted them to trust me with some cooler shots. At the end of the apprenticeship, you're meant to sit an exam. The idea being you would sit the exams, and then if you pass, if the company has the space, you can actually be offered a job at the end of it. What happened with me was that after 18 months, so 6 months before I was meant to finish the apprenticeship, my head of 2D at the time at the pub just turned around to me and said, "Do you want to stay at the mill?" And I said, "Yeah, of course." And he just offered me the job on the spot, which was amazing. So it means by the time we got around to doing the exam, I didn't have to worry about passing anyway because I already had the job secured. So that was it. In the space of 18 months from leaving college with no experience, at the end of that, they had offered me the job and kept me on, and I'd now essentially secured a career where I'd carry on working in that company. And that set me up on the path that I've been on ever since. So about another year, 18 months goes by, and again, still carry on learning. I'm getting better all the time, and I'm having the absolute time of my life working on some awesome projects. If you've seen the show reel that I made on my YouTube channel 5 years after working at the mill, you'll see some of the stuff that I got to work on. And then COVID hits. Global pandemic, the world shuts down, shoots stop, the work dries up pretty much entirely for visual effects companies because there's no shoots happening, so there's nothing to work on. By all accounts, this should be a massive disaster for my career. Unfortunately, due to the lack of work, there were several waves of redundancy, and also throughout the whole visual effects industry in general, people were just resigning and going to other companies just because the pandemic kind of kicked them into gear and they felt like maybe it was a good time for a change. So what that meant for me specifically at the mill was that there was now a bit of a gap in the 2D department where a lot of the senior artists above me had left. I was still a junior at this point, maybe pushing my way towards a mid, if you're being generous. And as a result of all those people leaving, I started to get some opportunities to work on some stuff as a more senior artist a lot earlier than I think I would if the pandemic hadn't come along. I had a really good head of department who really took me under his wing and looked after me and was always backing me up and pushing me to do better and better stuff. So quite soon after this all happened, I started to lead some projects. Also during the pandemic, because we couldn't leave the house a lot of the time during the proper lockdown, I did quite a lot of freelance work. It was never really my intention to go down this route. It just kind of happened slowly. And then one day I realized I was actually doing it quite seriously. It started off just from getting work every now and again through my YouTube channel where people would just message me and say, "Hey, I've seen your videos. I'm making a music video for so-and-so artist. Would you be interested in just doing some visual effects shots for the music video?" And then when the cryptocurrency thing took off, I did quite a lot of NFTs over the space of about a year. I got commissioned to make 1,000 NFTs for a cryptocurrency that was launching, and I made a few other ones just like individual pieces for other people. Never stuff that I was selling, I just got paid a flat rate to make the artwork and then they minted it and everything. And also a friend of a friend put my name forward for someone that he knew that was working for Gucci that was their editor. They needed some visual effects on like a one-off project and I helped them out with that. And then the working relationship was just really good and I ended up doing a lot of work for them over the course of about 12 months outside of my day job. So you can imagine I was working my full-time day job, which sometimes, as visual effects tends to, you end up working quite late anyway. Then I would finish working my day job at the mill and then do some freelance work in the evenings. So quite often I was working from about 8 AM till midnight for about 18 months. Not the healthiest of working environments, but there was nothing else to do and I saved a load of money for a house deposit, which I'll talk about in a bit as well. So no regrets, I got a load of experience leading projects and stuff on my own for the first time. That all came to a head about 5 years after I started the mill, where just after the pandemic had calmed down and everything, visual effects companies realised that all the people they'd made redundant, they now needed back because they had more work coming in and now didn't have the staff to do it. So there was this really funny phase where for about 6 months, every visual effects company in London was just desperately trying to get more artists. And naturally, the mill being one of the best visual effects companies in London, the artists at the mill were in really high demand. Over the space of about 3 or 4 months, I must have had LinkedIn messages from recruiters at more or less every visual effects company in London. I had a chat with a few of them, I got made some quite nice offers, but I still really liked working at the mill. And then I got approached by a company called Coffee and TV. I had a chat with them, they were really nice, and they were also quite famous within the industry for looking after people really well and having a good work-life balance, which was something, especially after the pandemic, I started to value more and more. It was never really my intention to leave, and then I found out that a few people that I really liked working with at the mill had also been in touch with Coffee and TV at the same time, and eventually we came to the decision, actually, if we're all going to go together, that would be a really nice opportunity, because then you won't be starting at a new company and not knowing anyone, we'll all be moving as like a little family. So 5 years after starting on an amazing journey at the mill, it was with an incredibly heavy heart that I handed in my resignation. So I left the mill and I started a couple of days later at Coffee and TV as a visual effects lead, which is where I now currently work. I've been there for almost exactly 2 years at the point of releasing this video, and I'm having a fantastic time. The combination of the pay rise that I got to become a lead and move to Coffee and TV, along with the money that I'd saved from all the freelance work that I'd done during the pandemic, has allowed me to buy a 2-bedroom flat in London at the age of 24, which I have to say is not something I thought I would be doing for a long time. Property is very expensive in London, especially buying on your own. It's incredibly difficult, so I'm super grateful that I've ended up in the right place at the right time to make the most of the opportunities and climb the ladder and negotiate decent salaries. I'm currently sat here recording this video in my flat, in my spare bedroom, which as you can probably see, I've turned into an office and a music room. Now the deposit's paid for this place and I have a mortgage, I've pretty much completely retired from freelancing and I'm just able to live very comfortably on the salary that I get from my day job, which again means my work-life balance is a lot healthier because I'm not working in the evenings now. I enjoyed it at the time and I don't regret it at all, but it wasn't sustainable. So it's nice just to be able to finish and go next door and lie on the sofa and watch a film rather than being at my desk until midnight. I really do feel like I'm living the dream. I'm incredibly grateful to be where I am and for all the people that have helped me get here along the way. There was definitely an element of passion and ability involved, but I think it'd be pretty naive not to recognise that a lot of this just came from being in the right place at the right time and just making the most of the opportunities when they came up. So work hard, say yes to everything and make your own luck.